I came back to the United States in two different times. In 1967, I came back and I worked was at Cornell as a research associate, but also traveled around, speaking about the war. And then I came back after I was kicked out in 1971. In 71, we formed what we call the Mobile Education Project. Not a very exciting name, but it described what we were doing. We went from U.S. community to U.S. community with in a panel truck, just a small truck, with an exhibit of Vietnamese people. We had pictures, of farmers planting their rice, and we had a few pictures of the war, but mostly just everyday pictures. And we would put on a Vietnamese dinner and serve really wonderful food. I probably did more of learning how to cook Vietnamese when I got back to the U.S. because when I came back here, in the early 70s, it was very hard to find a Vietnamese restaurant. Unlike today. Today there are many Vietnamese restaurants. There weren't in the early 70s. And I was traveling around the country. I was very anti-war then. This is, and we wanted to get people to understand what Vietnam was like, what the culture was like, and that sort of thing. And food seemed to be the best way to do that. So another one of the people that was working in Vietnam, actually with Catholic Relief Service mostly, did work with IVS later. But she and I would go to communities all around the U.S. and we would cook Vietnamese food, and it started, with finding Vietnamese in this country who would tell us how to make pho, the Vietnamese noodle soup, how to make cha za, the spring rolls, how to make tit ca, the special fish dish, and how to make like all these different dishes. So every time we would go to a U.S. community, before we got there, we would ask people to organize a dinner, in a church basement or somewhere like that. And we found that maybe the best way that we could, at least best way for us, to get people to think about the Vietnamese as people, what they ate, and then we would read some Vietnamese poetry and, do those kinds of things. And we found also that pictures of napalm children were not a very effective way to get people to understand the Vietnam War. They couldn't look at the pictures, and they couldn't make a connection between what we were doing in Vietnam and the pictures of napalm children. But when they were eating like Vietnamese soup, we were able to get across the idea, well, think of yourself as a Vietnamese while you eat their soup. And then ask, the questions of how would you feel about this happening if it was happening here, or if in our Civil War, the French joined one side and you were living on the other side, if they joined the side of the South and started fighting with us, how would you have felt? So food is very important in the politics of this world. We set up in a lot of malls. And I remember, because of our name, the Indochina exhibit, they thought it was going to be fine porcelain. The mall managers thought it was going to be fine porcelain, that which fits in fine, to the mall. And when we got there, the manager, who was very conservative, he came out very upset because he said, you tricked me. This is not China. Where's the blanking China? And so we explained, no, this is Indochina. This is a place out, you know. And he said, yeah, that's where the gooks are. And so he was very upset. We had to move in from there because he was going to call the police in and that sort of thing. Another time, Jackie and I were in, Jackie Chagnon, as this woman who'd been in Vietnam with me, and she was a great cook, and so we were doing our thing. But we were in Augusta, Georgia, at the Dart Pharmacy, I think it was. I'm not sure of that, but I think it was. And this guy came out of the pharmacy. He was very, very angry. And we were just outside still, just standing there. And he came and he said to me, "You're a foreigner." And I said, "No, I'm from Vermont." And he said, "I told you so." And then, he said, "What are you doing with all this Vietnam stuff?" And I said, "Well, we were invited to set up our little exhibit here, and I hope you liked it." And I remember he grabbed me by the throat and was choking me. And he had me pushed up against this car. It was this elderly couple. And I remember they were so afraid that he was going to do damage to their car. They were a very nice couple and so on, and they stayed and talked with us after the whole incident. Jackie was wearing a peace symbol. And I remember her turning to her and saying, "What are you doing with that chicken scratching on your neck?" And she didn't understand what he was referring to. But of course it was the peace symbol. Then he said he was going to send his women folk down to tear out the hair in her head. And so all these people were gathering around. And I think eventually he realized that I was getting the sympathy vote or something, so he walked off. That was the only time that anyone, when we were traveling around, came up to try to kill me. I mean, later my house was firebombed, but that was in Washington, D.C., and fortunately I was away. I think when we were traveling around, I think a lot of people were beginning to question their views on Vietnam. And what we were saying was challenging, them, in that way. That they wanted to believe, really deeply wanted to believe that what our country was doing in Vietnam was right. They wanted to believe and had been taught to believe that communism was evil. And we were saying, well, first of all, of course, we were saying that the war was not about communism, the war was about nationalism. And so we were challenging all of their thoughts about Vietnam. So I think they felt challenged. They felt that we were saying they were wrong. They felt that what we were saying was unpatriotic. And we were saying, the patriotic thing to do is to question what our government is doing, that we are not only destroying a country, a very beautiful country, but we're also tearing apart our own country because it's an unwinnable war. And I think up to that time, up to the 1970s, Americans believed that we were infallible, that we could, whatever we wanted to do, we could do. And I think they felt that we were challenging their deepest held beliefs, about our country. And, there was a lot of, these were tiny Asian people, and why couldn't we beat them? And we would say, no, we're going to lose that war.